In November 2025, a piece of legislation swept through the United States Congress with near unanimous support. The Epstein Files Transparency Act passed the House of Representatives 427-1 and sailed through the Senate without a single opposing vote. It was a rare moment of bipartisan unity in an otherwise divided political landscape. The law seemed straightforward. The Department of Justice would have 30 days to release all unclassified documents related to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, the convicted sex traffickers whose criminal enterprise ensnared dozens of young women and girls, and whose social circle included some of the world's most powerful figures. President Donald Trump signed it into law on November 19, 2025, but what happened next would expose not just the contents of those files, but a series of failures that victims' advocates are calling one of the most egregious violations of privacy in American legal history. This is the story of the Epstein Files, what they revealed, what they concealed, and why their release has sparked a political firestorm that continues to this day. To understand what went wrong, we first need to understand what the law actually required. The Epstein Files Transparency Act was remarkably specific. It mandated the release of all Department of Justice materials relating to Jeffrey Epstein's investigations, prosecutions, and death. This included flight logs, travel records, communications with government officials, immunity deals, plea agreements, and internal DOJ communications about decisions to charge or not charge individuals connected to Epstein, but the law also contained crucial protections. Section 2, subsection B, clearly stated that records could be withheld or redacted if they contained personally identifiable information of victims or victims' personal and medical files. The law explicitly prohibited withholding information based on embarrassment, reputational harm, or political sensitivity to any public figure. Representative Thomas Massie, a Republican from Kentucky, was one of the bill's primary sponsors. He worked alongside Democratic Representative Jason Crow to craft language that would protect survivors while exposing enablers. Massie and his colleagues gained the trust of Epstein survivors by showing them the exact legal language that would shield their identities. The law gave the Justice Department 30 days until December 19, 2025, to comply. When that deadline arrived, the department released only a small fraction of the files. On January 30, 2026, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche announced what he called the final major release, over 3 million additional pages, including 2,000 videos and 180,000 images. But here's the problem. The Justice Department had identified approximately 6 million pages as potentially responsive to the law. They were releasing only half. Within hours of the January 30th release, attorneys representing Epstein survivors began receiving frantic calls from their clients. Their names were in the files, not redacted, not protected, fully exposed to the world. Attorney Brad Edwards represents more than 300 Epstein survivors. Along with his law partner, Brittany Henderson, he immediately contacted the Justice Department. What they discovered was shocking in its scope. According to court filings, at least 31 people who were victimized as children had their identities left unredacted in the released documents. A Wall Street Journal investigation found at least 43 victims' full names exposed throughout the files, some appearing over 100 times in different documents. But it wasn't just names. Victims' email addresses, phone numbers, and other identifying information were left visible. In some cases, text was only partially blacked out, allowing anyone to read through the thin redactions. In other instances, redactions could be removed simply by double-clicking on the PDF. Perhaps most disturbingly, the New York Times found more than 40 nude photographs that appeared to show young women, or possibly teenagers, with their faces clearly visible. These images, which the Justice Department claimed had all been redacted, were available for anyone in the world to download. Danielle Bensky, a survivor who was a teenage ballerina when she says Epstein abused her 20 years ago, told reporters she initially thought it was carelessness. Then she considered incompetence, but now she says, "It feels a bit deliberate. It feels like a bit of an attack on survivors." Annie Farmer, one of the women who testified against both Epstein and Maxwell at their trials, was equally direct. Speaking to the New York Times, she said, "It's hard to imagine a more egregious way of not protecting victims than having full nude images of them available for the world to download." The irony was stark. While victims' identities were exposed, many alleged perpetrators' names remained heavily redacted throughout the documents. The Justice Department's defense raised more questions than it answered. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche claimed that redaction errors affected about 0.001% of all materials, though if accurate, that percentage would translate to over 3,000 pages containing victim information. He emphasized that more than 500 attorneys and reviewers had worked on the document released, and that the department took victim protection very seriously. But survivors and their attorneys weren't buying it. On February 1st, 2026, attorneys representing more than 200 alleged victims filed an emergency request with federal judges Richard Berman and Paul Engelmeyer. They asked for the immediate shutdown of the Justice Department's Epstein Files website, calling the release the single most egregious violation of victim privacy in one day in United States history. Their legal filing was scathing. "The DOJ has possessed the names of victims that it promised to redact for months," attorneys Henderson and Edwards wrote. "A simple name search would have prevented this entirely." The filing noted something particularly troubling. Reviewers appeared to have applied wildly inconsistent standards. The same person's name might be redacted in one document, but left completely exposed in another version of the identical file. Some survivors reported being flooded with harassment and disgusting private messages after their identities were revealed. Others found their lives turned upside down as family members, employers, and communities learned details they had kept private for years. The Justice Department scrambled to respond. They withdrew several thousand documents from their website and set up an email address for victims to report redaction concerns. But the damage was done. The files had already been downloaded by countless individuals and would remain circulating online indefinitely. A federal judge in New York scheduled a hearing for February 5th to consider whether to order the website's complete shutdown until proper redactions could be guaranteed. Despite the privacy violations, the files did contain significant new information about Jeffrey Epstein's criminal network and the extent of his connections to powerful individuals. The New York Times conducted an exhaustive analysis using proprietary search software. They found more than 5,300 files containing over 38,000 references to President Donald Trump, his wife Melania, and his Mar-a-Lago club in Florida. Previous releases brought the total to over 5,400 files with Trump-related references. To be clear, the mere presence of Trump's name in these files does not prove wrongdoing. Many of the references come from news articles that had been forwarded to Epstein's email or from FBI tips that were never substantiated. Deputy Attorney General Blanche stated publicly that the Justice Department investigated allegations against Trump but did not find credible information to merit further investigation. However, the files do confirm that Trump's relationship with Epstein lasted longer than Trump has publicly acknowledged. Handwritten notes from a September 2019 FBI interview describe a victim recalling being transported to Mar-a-Lago to meet Trump. According to the notes, Epstein said to Trump, "This is a good one, huh?" The notes explicitly state they do not suggest misconduct by Mr. Trump. The files also included an October 2002 email from someone named Melania to Ghislaine Maxwell, praising a New York Magazine profile of Epstein. The profile had included Trump's now infamous quote, calling Epstein a terrific guy who likes beautiful women as much as I do and many of them are on the younger side. It's unclear if this email was from the future First Lady, as the sender's email address was redacted. Beyond Trump, the files mention numerous other public figures from various fields: politicians, business leaders, academics, and celebrities. Some were described in FBI documents as subjects of salacious information. Many of these individuals have never been charged with crimes related to Epstein. A 2007 memo revealed that federal prosecutors in Miami had prepared a 60-count indictment against Epstein, but were overruled by supervisors. The controversial non-prosecution agreement that followed, which allowed Epstein to serve just 13 months, has been a source of outrage for years. The release of the files coincided with an escalating political battle within the Republican Party. In late January 2026, President Trump posted on Truth Social about Representative Thomas Massie, one of the lawmakers who had championed the Epstein Files Transparency Act. Trump claimed that Massie had become a liberal and made disparaging comments about Massie's new wife, suggesting she was a radical left flamethrower. Massie responded by revealing new details about the Epstein Files controversy. He explained that his wife had actually suggested he personally ask Attorney General Pam Bondi about when Phase 2 of the Epstein Files would be released. According to Massie, Bondi had told him there were no more files to release, a claim that would be contradicted when millions of additional pages were published just days later. In a rare move, former Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who had resigned from Congress in January 2026 after breaking with Trump, came to Massie's defense. Greene wrote a blistering post on social media stating, "President Trump treats those who support him the most like crap. Thomas Massie's wife voted for him 3 times. She's not a radical left flamethrower." Greene went further, criticizing what she saw as Trump's misplaced priorities. Thomas Massie votes with the president 91% of the time, but won't vote to protect Epstein's sick pedophile friends or send America's hard-earned tax dollars to Israel's war or any other foreign country. She ended with a sharp rebuke of her former Republican colleagues. All the weak Republicans in the House stay silent, refusing to utter even a word of support for their friend Thomas Massie. "Shame on every one of you cowards. You make me sick." The conflict highlighted a growing rift between Trump and a faction of Republicans who believed the administration wasn't being fully transparent about the Epstein investigation. Representatives Massie and Ro Khanna sent a joint letter requesting access to unredacted versions of several key documents, including Epstein's email accounts, victim interview statements, and a draft indictment from 2007. Their letter noted the inconsistency in redactions. "We have seen a blanket approach to redactions in some areas, while in other cases victim names were not redacted at all. Congress cannot properly assess the department's handling of the Epstein and Maxwell cases without access to the complete record." As of early February 2026, fundamental questions remain unanswered. First, why were victim protections so catastrophically mishandled? The Justice Department claims to have employed 500 reviewers and multiple levels of quality control. Attorneys for survivors argue that there is no conceivable degree of institutional incompetence sufficient to explain the scale, consistency, and persistence of the failures. Second, what happened to the other 3 million pages? The Justice Department identified approximately 6 million pages as responsive to the Transparency Act, but released only half. Officials claim the remainder consists of duplicates, materials covered by various privileges, or items that fell outside the scope of the law. Critics, including Democratic lawmakers, say this violates the clear intent of the legislation. Third, will anyone face additional criminal charges? Deputy Attorney General Blanche suggested on CNN that new prosecutions are unlikely, stating that while there are a lot of horrible photographs, having correspondence and images doesn't necessarily provide grounds to prosecute someone. This statement troubled many who believed the files contain evidence of criminal conduct beyond what Epstein and Maxwell were charged with. Fourth, how will the government restore trust with survivors? The repeated privacy violations, first in December 2025, again in January 2026, have left many victims feeling betrayed by the very system that was supposed to protect them while pursuing justice. A group of survivors and family members of the late Virginia Giuffre released a joint statement that captured their frustration. This latest release of Jeffrey Epstein files is being sold as transparency, but what it actually does is expose survivors. Once again, survivors are having their names and identifying information exposed, while the men who abused us remain hidden and protected. That is outrageous. The Epstein Files saga represents more than just a bureaucratic failure or political controversy. At its core, it's about a fundamental question: whose privacy matters more in the pursuit of justice, the victims or the powerful? The law Congress passed was clear. It demanded transparency about Epstein's enablers while protecting those he harmed, but in execution the opposite occurred. Victims were exposed while many alleged perpetrators remained shielded. As legal battles continue in federal court, as politicians trade accusations, and as journalists continue analyzing millions of pages of documents, the survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's abuse are left navigating a world where their most painful experiences are now public record, available for download by anyone with an internet connection. The question now is not just what the files contain, but whether the system that released them can be trusted to deliver actual justice rather than merely the appearance of transparency. For the survivors still fighting for accountability, that question remains painfully unanswered.